What I am doing is I am opening the door and welcoming death to come and live inside. It may not be a physical death in that moment, but it might be the death of a marriage, the death of an opportunity, the death of an influence that you had or a platform that you maintain, a distance from our Heavenly Father. It's the death of our soul, and it will lead us to becoming who we are. Today is more about trials specifically tied to temptation. What's fascinating is, as you read through this passage, you read about trials, you read about tests, and you read about temptation. Oftentimes, if you've been in church very long, you maybe have heard a pastor say, in the Greek translation, the original language that the Bible was written in, the New Testament, the Koine Greek, will say things like, hey, this word means this, and we don't get this full meaning in our English language like we see in the Greek language. Well, this isn't the case here. In fact, it's the opposite. We actually understand it better in English than we do in the Greek, because in the Greek, trial, test, and temptation are all the same word. But in English, we have a different word for each one of those three things. The word is parasmos, and they all come from the same word. And ultimately, it lands in this place where there's this test, there's this temptation, this trial, this experience that is attempting to ascertain a response. So there's a response that we can lead, that we can direct when we experience trials or testing of our faith. Or today, James wants us to see temptation. So he's putting us to the test to see a response. Whose response? Your response, my response. There's going to be forces that come against us that try to lead us in a certain direction, to think a certain thing. So the idea here, the theme here is this word agency. And maybe we've never thought about what agency actually means. I've got a definition that I've got for you. Agency is the ability to control and influence your own thoughts and behavior in various situations. So it's the idea that instead of just being passive and becoming a piece of driftwood in this life that I'm living, I actually have the opportunity to respond and to lead my response. Rather than being led by the trials and responding, letting the trials dictate my response, I get to lead my response in the trial. This is what James is trying to point us to. He's been telling us this as we get to verse 12. He's saying, blessed, you want a thriving life from the inside out. It's found in perseverance through faith, all as a result of what's the promise, the crown of life. We talked about that last week. The crown of life being there's a future to look forward to as you run the race, and you run the race with faith. So he's talking about temptation. We see this in verse 13. It continues on. It says, no one is to say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. It's a fascinating passage, maybe one we've never truly considered unless we've studied the book of James. But I think it's important to understand here briefly. What James is saying in this book and throughout this whole 5 chapters, he's not trying to come across as heavy-handed. He's not presenting this information and writing this letter to be this righteous scolding to the people that are reading the book of James. What he wants for them is just to simply be aware. Be aware of the life and the freedom that is available as we live in our faith, as we do what we say we believe, and we let that influence and impact our faith. And remember, if I said this last week, remember who he's writing to. He's writing to people of faith who have been evicted from their homes, who have maybe been fired from their jobs, who have been imprisoned for what they believe in Jesus, and who have maybe even had family members who have been killed because of this faith in Jesus. This is who James is writing to. And so when you think about trials, some of those trials are significantly heavier than some of the things that we carry. But I think we can land in the same place when it comes to temptation. I think we can understand when it comes to temptation. So in light of temptation and recognizing that in every trial, every temptation, the responsibility is on me. How I respond and how it goes when it comes to temptation ultimately lands on me. But it's important to know this, and this is what he says, is that your temptation, my temptation, never comes from God. God is not the source of your temptation. He's saying God does not tempt you, which means you can't blame God for the temptation, or anyone else for that matter. Not Satan, not God, not your spouse, not your kids, not your boss, not your employees, not the person down the street. The temptation comes from where? It comes from us. And so what he's saying in almost every trial, when you're walking through a difficult time especially, there will be a chance for a shortcut, for a convenient step, a compromise, maybe a sinful stress reliever, some replacement for your trust in God, to do something in your own way, knowing that it's not the way that God has called you to live. But understand that this does not come from God. Where does he say it comes from? He says it comes from our own desires, that we're enticed by our own desires. So temptation never comes from God, but it is ultimately rooted in our own desire. It always starts with me. I am the primary source for my temptation. Maybe we've never thought about it this way, but look what he goes on to say. He kind of walks through this progression. Verse 15. Then when lust, because he says we've been enticed by our own lust, then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it has run its course, brings forth death. So where there's desire, action can ultimately follow when I say yes to what that desire is. Now, is every desire broken? No, but our response can be broken to whatever the desire is. Here's the progression James wants us to see. It breaks down in 3 parts. You've got your desire, which can lead to the birth of sin. This is what he's talking about. This conception process gives birth to sin, which leads to grows in death. So we've got your desires, birth to sin, grows into death. Ultimately, every single broken yes that I give to the desire in my life lands in a place where a sin baby is born, so to speak. A sin baby is born, and something is brought to life that wasn't there before. And here's what I know, and this is what I think James is saying. Every sin baby grows into some sort of grim reaper in your life. I told you last week that I grew up on a ranch. Every single Saturday, I would go out to this ranch with my dad, and we would drive out, and we would pass through different ranches on the way there. And there was one particular ranch. We were friends with the owner of that ranch at the time, and one time we were driving out, and we crossed paths, and we were talking to him, and he said, "Hey, you'll never guess what I have at the house. You should bring the boys over and show the boys," me and my younger brothers. And I was probably 10 years old, and so we go to their house, and he has rescued a baby mountain lion cub. And I mean, this thing is tiny, and it's running around his house like a house cat. And it was the craziest thing. I remember going into his house and seeing the mountain lion. I'm like, that's a mountain lion? How is that a mountain lion? It literally looked like a house cat, like a kitten. And it walks over, and it's like going through our legs, like cats do, which doesn't make sense, but they're, kind of going through the legs, doing the weave and purring as you pet it. I mean, you would think this is a nice, innocent kitty cat. Fast forward several months later, and we're on the way out to the ranch, and we stop by their house again to go see the mountain lion because he still has it, that innocent, sweet little kitten. We pull up. Well, the cat's not in the house anymore. He's built this enclosure out behind his house for this mountain lion. And here's what was crazy. We walk out, and he goes to show us this lion. He's going to feed it, and we get out there. And as we walk up, it's my dad, this rancher, me, and my brother, who's probably 6 or 7 years old. And we walk up, and as we walk up, that lion is locked in on my little brother. That's all he's looking at. As my brother moves, that lion's eyes move. He starts walking with my little brother as my brother's moving around. Why? Because the cat was a predator. It was born a predator. It will always be a predator. It went from cute and innocent, can't hurt anybody, to I want to eat you and take your life. You can't dismiss what James is saying here. He's saying it starts with a desire that begins with the birth of a sin, and it seems harmless, it seems contained, it seems like it's not that big of a deal, but it'll always land in a place where it begins to destroy you and leave you spiritually dead. And so every time I say yes to the desire, the brokenness in my life, what I am doing is I am opening the door and welcoming death to come and live inside. You're like, well, Wes, that's kind of extreme. What kind of death? Well, it may not be a physical death in that moment, but it might be the death of a relationship, the death of a marriage, the death of an opportunity, the death of an influence that you had or a platform that you maintain. It might be the death of significant things in our life. Family, intimacy. It distances us from our Heavenly Father. It's the death of our soul, and it will lead us to becoming who we are.